Joey Connect here, senior leader with Proteus. We're headquartered out of the Midwest, Omaha, Lincoln, Nebraska area. Today's topic is a fun topic because um, actually, in full transparency, we've done similar things, and I'm not going to name, but a participant in a. We have about 20 to 30, and hopefully many of you, 20 to 30% of our webinar attendees are repeats, meaning customers continue, not just customers, people and their teams continuously learning. So yeah, it's great, and so a lady who was participating in about 2 3 months ago a session. She said, "Hey Joey, do you mind expanding on this topic more of implementation is not onboarding because it was just a great question and she was experiencing some challenges." And I said, "Okay, I'll take it into consideration." And ta-da! So I listen. And also it's a very important kind of challenge too that some of it's nomenclature clearly, because many organizations when they say onboarding they're thinking it's covering both, but specifically if you're in a technology group or I think there is some gaps there, and so we're going to cover some of that today. So obviously many of you are doing both and you're just doing implementation, but implementation includes onboarding, or you're doing onboarding and da 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 da. Right? You guys get it. But there is some important things I want to kind of break through on this, and also share some tips or approaches that we know work very very well. So the purpose of these webinars is to give you tangible and actionable things to literally take back to your team today. So let's get started. Well, I'm still letting people in, so I apologize if I pause for a second, but we're getting up there. So let's get into it. So implementation is not onboarding. So the core problem or area of opportunity, every negative is a positive. Why companies, obviously there's some confusion here, especially in technology minded, is and we'll unpack this more as we go through some of the reasons why and some of the challenges uh, um, around this. But if you've been on other webinars with me, or literally like on almost everything we talk about, specifically if you're a SaaS company, I frequently joke with everybody like I don't give two hoots about going live. And this is core to this problem, is going live just means the implementation maybe is done, might not even be completely done, right? And so many organizations, when you start talking to them, because this is the pressure of measurement, right? TTV, time to value, you're always like, oh, it doesn't take us that long at all. We have our customers up within 2 weeks. And then some of you might be chuckling, and I'm like, that's great. 2 weeks, great. So what's going on in 2 weeks? Well, not much. Is that time to value? Or are they actually receiving any value, et cetera, et cetera? So a lot of the times, and specifically technology related, sometimes professional services, we see this too, is that there's a big difference between implementation and onboarding, right? And implementation does not equal onboarding. Um, and so this is why, in many cases, a lot of products go to die, and have huge churn, all sorts of things that we're going to cover here. And obviously, everybody on this call is somewhere in this sphere, so you know where I'm going on with this, right? Implementation is just a piece of onboarding, and they work together too. They're not independent. And this isn't a war of implementation versus onboarding, because in many cases, in a lion's share of organizations, meaning 85 plus percent, you're the same person. So you don't want to get mad at yourself, right? You want to work with yourself, and we'll get better together around this, right? Because typically, unless it's something really, really complicated or something super, super simple, really, the simple ones it's nobody. But obviously, most of what we're talking about here is something that requires implementation and adoption. And there's kind of some technical concepts around this that we're going to cover, but then also some just styles and philosophies, and sharing just some best practices that we've learned throughout the years. So many of you, and if you want to fact check me, please do put it in the comments. But if you want to check, everybody on this call knows Salesforce. Salesforce estimated 70%, and it's not just Salesforce, 70% of CRM deployments fail, and only 30% basically are providing the value deserved to that. So you can start to think why around that. Many of the times, almost probably all of you are dealing with a CRM. Were you really onboarded correctly around that CRM? Is it matching all your needs, right? So start to think about some of your own experiential, and that's a widely published number around that. And of course, that logically then applies to your own product and services that are out there. You can get it implemented, but that doesn't mean it's meeting the goals of the client being onboarded, nor are they getting the ROI desired, right? So you guys can, I'm not going to read all the bullet points. Of course, as I mentioned, all of this will be shipped to you. The most important one, I not most important, probably I don't want to get into that game, but the last bullet point for many of you, if you are a technology or some sort of specific product line to solve some certain use case problems or challenges, also during the configuration or implementation, there's also hopefully quite a bit of like bespoke consulting you're doing and best practices. And a lot of organizations really value that approach. They're not just buying your product or service, they're also valuing what they hope is the expertise of the team members that they're bringing on, and carrying that through from obviously implementation all the way through into the adoption side of the process. Okay, so these are some of the reasonings behind kind of putting this together, because they are equally as important, but implementation is not success. It's just part of the journey, and then getting people successfully using the solution and receiving the benefits, the ROI that they desire is very, very important. All right. So that's the underlying bifurcation basically of the process. But let's drive in to that bifurcation. So, excuse me, before I do, if you're a repeat, you've seen this this slide is in every single one. So why are we having this problem also? So a lot of it is the implementation side of onboarding is becoming, let's just be honest, very, very challenging in many, many verticals, right? And it's the first step before adoption can happen, obviously, the second side of this, or what we're calling obviously finalizing the onboarding, right? And so the amount of people involved just getting a solution live nowadays is it's camp run amok, right? So you got a lot of people on your side that are siloed. Same thing on the client side. You got a lot of different personalities, and you're trying to navigate through a very complex, typically, implementation process. Even if your tool is simple, you got the whole complexity around implementation, and then you're just getting it to the phase where people can start using it. And now you got to fight that second battle. And I don't mean battle in a negative way, right? You guys all know where I'm coming from, right? So there's very complex situations and dynamics that come out of this and thing. And it's typically obviously related to the number of people, the complexity of the implementation, and then finally getting into the actual user's hands or people who are going to be leveraging it and kind of rolling that out. You want to double down and make this even more complex? Many of you probably, and I hope so, because it's recommended as much as possible, when you're actually done with implementation or implementation to a certain point, you're rolling it out for adoption in a phased manner so that you don't step on a couple of landmines and really get in trouble. You want to kind of hopefully, if you can, phase it out so that you can find any early integration issues, other issues, usability issues, coaching issues, any of these issues on the adoption side with a smaller Tiger team led kind of experience to really protect the house before, pulling this and rolling it out to the greater team. So I'll cover that here in a little bit. That's what's obviously related to the environment. The environment drives the complexity of the implementation, and it's also a level of complexity for the adoption side of the transaction. All right, team. So again, kind of building the foundation for kind of where the problems start to lie. So implementation versus onboarding. I debated about putting versus because there's not, there's no teams here. In order to win, we need both. We need to do both, right? And so part of that, and again, many of you are in different types of companies, different levels of products and services. So some of this is a little high level, but I'm going to get a little bit deeper later and then give you some takeaways for that. But implementation typically, and if you disagree or you want me to add some things, please comment. It's all right. So open conversation. Um, Implementation, setup, and configuration, kind of high level, right? And then you get into onboarding, right, which is activation and value realization. And so my assumption is all of you or most of you are familiar with time to value, TTV, shorthand, and I've done plenty of presentations on people frequently forget the V. Like it's just time to live, right? Or it's time to get going. It's time to be done. They forget about the V. And the V stands for value and providing the client ROI. And that's always a very important thing in all of this is making sure the original reason why the client purchased your product or service that they start to see that value. And we'll talk about that more, right? But it's basically two pieces that have to happen. And for many of our clients, when they first come to us, they're very worried about the implementation because they're getting slammed there pretty bad. Just it costing them a lot of money, etc. Then the second part of it is people aren't maybe utilizing their tool the best way, which then becomes the onboarding and activation side of it. But there are two distinct challenges you need to be reflecting with your team when you're looking at how your team is performing and of course how the client is performing basically is that onboarding and activation. And I'm going to share with you a process we leverage with our own clients that really works extremely well. We have obviously um, aggregated this over time, but then also we rip off and duplicate from other firms too, obviously, right? We learn, right? And I'll share with you kind of hence why you're here today, right? So we're going to unpack this more, but I always like that little quote there at the bottom. You can steal that. That's a real mantra for the team. So your teams, which we'll talk about here more. So implementation responsibilities, again, keeping this at a macro level for the purposes, sorry, a couple people coming in later. For the purposes, again, you can take this and expand it or tweak it to your ecosystem, but what implementation should own. And again, for many of you, you're both sides of this equation, but sometimes we do have clients that have bifurcated even multiple teams that are actually involved in this. So you can adjust, but in spirit, it's all the kind of what you would guess, the integrations, technical, the planning side of it, of getting whatever product or service up, technical readiness of everything. And basically, this milestone for that team is getting it live. That's not the goal of onboarding, right? And so, just that milestone in your mutual plan or hopefully mutual plan kind of concept, it's just that their role is to get it live, like very, very, very critical. Right. And then from there, it's getting it blown into the organization in a way for success, right? Or guided into the organization for success. Again, you can tweak, accordingly, but this is kind of if you're starting to mind map how your stuff should be laid out, kind of think of this from this classification. And again, might just be you and your team, but you get where we're going here. So then the other side of the equation, of course, is onboarding responsibilities. So driving customer activation of whatever it is, right? And so behavior change is typically the number one killer or kind of problem for folks, right? Outcome and behavior change are typically going to be your biggest things. And I'm going to share with you kind of an important kind of concept around all of this a little bit later. but don't forget about the behavior change, the training and enablement, obviously driving usage. And there's many techniques to this, and we're going to cover them here. The post 120. When we say post 120, that's post live. That's really the adoption period that we're looking at here for the onboarding, right? And really getting customers to see the value, right? Now, the value there is, again, the same value that was in the initial sales process, hopefully identified, right? And how the client would measure ROI. And I keep pointing back to that. And that's not the purpose of today's meeting, but in your kickoff calls with your new clients, very critical piece that kind of carries through. And if you don't know much about this, please just go back out to our website, and there's plenty of resources related to this. Is helping to work with the client to determine the highest ROI things and how to measure basically success for your client. Because obviously, when we say onboarding responsibility and getting them to see value, that value is obviously the value they've identified with you. Because for 3 of your clients, the actual bleeding point or area of opportunity where they want to see value could be different, right? And it's also not just a one size fit all kind of value play either, right? Which hopefully determined your implementation plan too. But you get the point. There's the implementation side, and then when we start to getting into onboarding responsibilities and kind of obviously kind of where the rubber starts to hit the road, right? You have a certain amount of time for that client to feel engaged, seeing value, momentum, right? All of these things are mission critical because in that first 120 days, it's make or break. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. We'll talk to this a little more, but I mentioned it already once. If at all possible, being able to kind of phase your go-to-market strategy, meaning launching the product inside the organization, doing that with a small team first, and then kind of scaling out will protect you and help you kind of refine a lot of the challenges that might come up in this process. We actually, in most of our client deployments, it's the same team from the initial implementation team and then all the way through during adoption. So as it's starting to be used by customers, your clients, right? Your clients starting to use your tool or service, our teams are actually still talking with them pretty intensely. And I'll tell you why is because you're trying to find all the pebbles or the little things to clear those out before you roll it out to the larger team internally at your client. And so even the implementation doesn't end at implementation or go live. Just making sure, like if you're a tech company, if you're in AI, this is called FDE, forward deployed engineering. We do a ton of that ourselves, where your product just being live is really just a platform there for your customer. Then as they start to adopt it, you need to still be heavily engaged with them to make tweaks, changes, areas of opportunity for them to really then go super class level excellence. I hopefully if you're a SaaS, you're kind of understanding what I'm saying there, because that's critical and that's how we work with our customers. I'll talk about it more if you don't understand that uh, piece, but it's not just about going live, it's about then optimization. So hidden gaps that kill the adoption. Um, this is interesting, and some of you might be shaking your heads. No post-launch owner. So so what we have found a lot of the times is that the person who owns implementation, getting it set up, is not the person who owns the rollout within the organization, but a lot of companies assume they are. Just let that sink in. So you have implementation, which is getting the bad boy set up, but then who really owns this, deploying it within the organization? Who is your internal champ? Like in sales, we would call that an internal champ, right? We call it onboarding champ, right? Equally as important, this person needs to be a power user, power smart, and really help navigate. You need to be a partner with him or her in kind of in this deployment. We'll expand on that more. But just think, just that one bullet point alone could be a very big gap in your deployment model, because I know it is for some of you, because as we talk to obviously all of our clients when they're coming into our ecosystem, we ask them, well, then who typically owns the rollout into the org? Well, it's the same. Well, maybe not. So very, very important concept. Um, the customer flat out frequently is just overwhelmed, right? You guys all know what I'm talking about. A lot of people hope and pray that adoption happens naturally. All right. Yeah. Well, yeah. Everybody knows that, right? Oh, they get it. Our tool is easy to use. Nope, it's not. And probably they're not seeing the value they want. Poor alignment. This comes back to the original implementation or the original goal not being right. So again, these are kind of hidden gaps you have to watch out for. And that's why carrying the team forward throughout the entire process really helps with this. The pebbles concept I talked about, um, an individual pebble won't stop the flow of water, but if you get 50 pebbles, it stops the flow of water, right? And that's in water as a metaphor here for adoption, right? So we see for a lot of clients, when they're deploying their product or service, they don't think of the pebble being that much of a big deal. The problem is that's happening over 20 users or 20, 50 users or 10 users, whatever it is. And it becomes a thorn in their side, and the pebbles are starting to build up. And then eventually the pebbles just stop everything, right? And so it's the implementation got to live, but you can't walk away from optimization of your deployment technically to really make sure you're getting rid of as many as possible the major behavior changes, the pebbles, and all of this happens as you're live already, meaning people are starting to use it. So again, I recommend, if possible, a small team deployment first, because you can find a lot of these problems or areas of tweaking and opportunity to clear that off the desk, and then go with a larger team deployment. Okay. And then, of course, churn lives in the first 120 days. That's where they might stop using the product immediately. They won't renew. You're not going to be able to cross sell them. I've done plenty of presentations on the financial impact of that on your org if you're looking for some calculators to do that. Symptoms of a failed launch, obviously low usage after you initially are going there. So these are ways to identify it. Um, no questions at all. I always joke. All too quiet on the Western Front. I think some of you are probably like, right? Oh, it's going great. We're not hearing anything from the client. And that's scary as all get out, right? Like you should be getting questions, right? During the like you should be coaching them on better utilization, right? Like it's just if these are happening, it's not a once in a lifetime unicorn, kind of doing this. So these are important. If you see this within your group, then it is quite challenging, right? Like, um, yeah, it's just the low usage, and you guys all know it's hard to get momentum again. So if you can do the phasing, that's why I don't I really discourage just turning on a bunch of users. For many clients, we try to talk to them about slicing out an industry. Like if you're selling into hospitals and banks, just for argument's sake here, is ISOing to just banks first, right? Then within the banking team, maybe ISO down to a smaller group of people who are, do 2 or 3 onboardings with them, and then you're refining, and then scaling out the best practices, and quite frankly, what you're also doing with that is the emotional buy-in from your team members, which is more important first, then they will transfer that then to the customer, right? Like that literally, because now they own your onboarding process more authentically because they were part of rebuilding it and getting it out to the customers. And then when you deploy that with the fuller team, they're leaders in helping with that methodology moving forward, right? Makes sense. Um, Obviously, the value milestones, we talk about this a ton, but in your mutual plan with your customers, obviously originally defining what those values are and having milestones for that. You should be able to show within the 120 model, post-launch 120, maybe not the full value chain that you ask, because that's a tight, but they should start to see the numbers or beginning elements of the value you promised or trend lines starting to come to reality. Okay. Like that's the pressure you have to put on yourself and your team, is we have to start to show, because again, that's creating the momentum to keep going, right? Because you are onboarding for quite a substantial period of time. And why I have this slide in here, couple things, because we talk about implementation, then we talk about onboarding, which is actually getting the users to adopt it. We do research every year, and pretty much it's not changing. Um, uh, so, so this is your customer talking here. What's on the screen here, and so this is how your customers are feeling about your onboarding, whatever you're selling. This is how they feel about it. And some of these elements clearly are about the configurations. Some of these are obviously inhibitors to adoption. So you have to understand the mindset and being empathetic to your product while it's being delivered into the organization. And so taking these into consideration when you're rolling out your product or service into the user groups, these are kind of concepts and topics you want to make sure you're covering with them and preemptively strike around this. All right. So just being very clear, this is how your customer feels about whatever product or service, um, you know, happens, right? So it's very, very important. And for most of our clients, the how it's structured is they obviously are getting the product to a certain point, implementation, go live, and then the post 120 typically starts for those clients. You might do two of them or three of them, depending on how if you're doing phases. You will launch a Tiger team with the first launch, and then obviously a Tiger team, and I'll expand that more at in a minute here. But you might go through this process multiple times when you're doing onboarding, meaning getting the customers to adopt it. It could be by three different teams you're onboarding. So you do team one, team two, team three. In essence, you're almost doing onboarding, air quote, three times. Now, don't get paranoid. You know what I'm getting by what I mean by that is you're just adding layers or more users, obviously, through that process. Um, okay. So first 120, I call it Tiger Team. It's the Apollo astronauts. That's where that comes from, if you want to look that up. But basically, how we do it, we call it forward developed experiences, FDE for us. And so, as I said, when you partner with us, just in spirit, like we have the original sales rep, we have your account lead, and we actually have a technical engineer that is involved during the implementation in the early stages, and then also through the first 120 days. In some ways, if it's phased, it's even longer, right? And so this Tiger team there is to identify those issues that are coming up as you are live. Does that make sense? So implementation got you to the best chance and ready to start to do phase one or team. But then as you're going live with real users, the Tiger team concept or the 120 has to still be a part of that to carry forward because more new problems are going to come up, right? There's going to be adoption issues. There's going to be configuration issues. There's going to be all sorts of things that start to bubble up as more and more users are doing this. The 120, whether you're like Joe, we only needed that for 30, 60, 90, 120. Again, we have many clients that are 6 months. Again, your product or your service will kind of dictate that or the complexity or how you're doing your pricing. So a lot of clients really enjoy these kinds of experiences because they can build that into the actual contracting experience for Y1, year one, or even year two. And so it it's a pretty high margin and valuable service to your customer because it's two edge. You can be charging typically for it relatively, not super profit, but more importantly, the client is using your product correctly. Ding, which means lower churn. Ding, which means more reoccurring revenue. Ding, which means more cross selling. Ding. So the LTV, lifetime value of your client, starts to substantially improve, right? And so these are the factors of that because so many groups want to just get them in, get them out. Let's get them on board. Let's go. It's Q4. Let's get the numbers rocking. Great. So you sign them. But when you just kind of hand the product over to them, I always joke with people like, we're not just a software company. Like, we're a company that wants to make you successful. When you're successful using our tool, you're with us for a long time and you'll do more with us. And that spirit has to be, it's very hard, we have found, for a lot of software companies to kind of think with this mindset, because sometimes software companies come in and like, we're the expert, we know everything, here's your product, this is how you should do it, and here you go. Well, yes, that's somewhat true, but then also every business operates a little bit differently, so you have to take that into consideration fully in the adoption and getting you to the numbers where they want to be. Hopefully you guys are, so implementation and then utilization, very, very different conversations. How you can solve that and optimize it, again, an approach that has worked very, very well for us and many, many clients of ours and software companies or high growth service companies, is basically you have this kind of tiger team concept, and they're involved in the implementation, the original implementation, and then carry that, a subset of those people if needed, wouldn't necessarily be everybody, into the actual deployment. Because when you're talking to your customer and they're like, we're having a problem with this report, but it would also be really nice if this report did this, this, and this, because then we would be 3 times faster doing something. A simple conversation like that in the Tiger Team format, the sales engineer or the deployment engineer can take that back, make some tweaks, and provide instant value to your client. Instant value to your client within 2-week period, right? Then the client starts to recognize, hey, these guys are more like partners than just software. And you can see how this starts to change the mindset of your client and the opportunity for growth in that. And so for us, me personally, it's the most critical factor of it, because implementation is implementation for sure. And there's a lot of discovery during the implementation. But everybody knows when you go and you can play video games and then go get in a car and do 120 miles an hour on a track, and you're like, oh, this is a lot different, right? And so same thing when it's rolled out or deployed, that's where you're going to start to learn tremendous amounts of the behavioral changes needed, all the other things that really dictate the make or break. Okay. Hopefully this is trending for you guys. I believe so. Okay. So post launch. So again, this is still kind of what we're talking about. What is really called adoption, obviously. Um, this is also a process for us also. So this isn't just like ho hum. Like we actually navigate kind of pretty. We have a lot of recommended ways of doing this, of course, but I've talked about some of these. Obviously, the activation period or the adoption period clearly should have very defined milestones, working with the correctly identified internal champ. Again, we recommend 120, dealer's choice. Also, just like the onboarding process for implementation, is setting up the commitments on the customer side, aka the internal champ. We do that all through mutual plans, of course. Very, very powerful, very good ways to get verbal commitments on everything. They just work when executed correctly. We do a lot of continuous improvement doing the FDE model, like I mentioned. So while we're launching, it isn't like this is what you're getting, good luck. While we're launching, we're also identifying we can do all these things to really improve the adoption experience and value to the customer. All right. So you can see it's not just training. Yes, you have to know how to use stuff, but it's connecting the dots of your solution or service into the environment of the customer, making sure that they are getting success. Because if not, it's what's going to happen. It's happening already, right? So really live on the data, really live on obviously overcommitting to making the customer happy. And it's interesting, quite frankly, because if you really embrace this kind of approach and manage it correctly, which isn't hard, we do a ton, we have a solution obviously to do that, your customers are actually a little taken back because they are used to be treated like garbage from a lot of the software vendors or service vendors, where they're like, here it is, let us know if you have any questions. If you need anything, we have a chat bot on the website, and you can submit a ticket to support, right? But when you're like, hey, here's our plan, after a week of training and whatever you're doing and you start using it, we want to meet with you guys, with the team, to really unearth any implementation mishaps, things that are not configured correctly or misunderstood. Also, is this working into the everyday workflows of your life? Like, is it okay? And it's not just, is it okay? How could we make this even easier for you or more optimal? And a lot of times people are like, what? Like, usually I get, no, the tool doesn't do that. Right. And so it's very, very interesting. You have to kind of work at it a little bit because some people are kind of taken back by your openness of hearing feedback. Right. It's very, very powerful. Very, very powerful for keeping clients for obviously. We talked about this a little bit. I'm pounding the drum on the desired outcomes because you have to have the foundation of what we agreed was the goal of doing this with you guys, and then obviously getting that return on investment for them. So it's kind of your lighthouse or compass heading to really ensure we're progressing together, right? And really changing the relationship, which I'll talk about here in a minute, kind of from the initial implementation to the initial adoption to then getting into more full-blown deployment and broader value generation than just the initial generation of value for the client. So I frequently look at it like this. There's setup, activation, early value, which is, again, you want to kind of structure your onboarding to have measurable wins in that first 120, and then full value later, right? And so you can, whatever you want to call these, but for us and a lot of success, and obviously the activation and early value is your riskiest area. Setup, of course, is a challenge. It's not easy, but the riskiest area is the activation and early value, because that's the momentum that then is going to drive to that broader value. But for us and for many of our clients, it's they're also trying to obviously do continuous value generation. So again, consultative solutions for success, not just a one-time win, because the relationships typically get broader and more use cases and more value creation, etc. And again, like that tagline we always like, it's you, if you're selling software or service, that's just a tool. Doesn't matter. Are the people getting value, and is the company getting ROI? That's what matters. Like you could sell them a widget here, like a red golf ball. Like doesn't matter. Like it's just, are they getting the value they want? Okay. Value milestones, again, I encourage when you're communicating, again, weaving this into the 120, you got your 30, 60, 90, obviously. Again, this is all mutual. I think I've talked to these a lot. Um, Obviously, all your milestones should be mapped to the original ROI or areas of opportunity, right? So, um, and most of this it sounds like a lot of items I'm talking about. It's not. These are just pre-structured mutual plans for your processes by client type. Potentially there might be some bifurcations by industry or how you're deploying them. It's just a process that you're executing with them because the client, your client of your product or service, trusts you. You're trying to build more trust, but they trust you on what's the best way to get this live. If you prescribe this out to them, because your clients don't know what they don't know, definitely about your service, they will follow this recipe you prescribe to them. It's not like trying to convince hearts and minds to make this happen. People will follow it if you say, this is how we get you to your ROI fast. You know, it's just communication and guidance to getting them to there. So it's not hard to, I don't want to say push these philosophies onto your client. It's not. You're wanting them to win. Like that's what I would say. Like we want to win, right? Everybody wants to win. Like DJ Khaled. I mean, like we just want to win, right? So like let's win. How do we win? Here's the playbook. Let's follow this and execute the living dickens out of this, and we're gonna get you live, hit your ROI, and probably find additional value for you. So the shift, this is what I was talking about. So at some point, you're going to evolve from what I'm calling the 120, which is the short term kind of mutual plans. Again, insert your own numbers and dates to more of roadmaps, right? Because now that you've established ROI with them, you have established what's more important, trust and delivery. So now the client is open to doing more, expansion, another team being added, whatever it might be. And that's when you're starting to look at roadmaps, bigger horizons per se of growth. But to be candid, rinse, repeat, doing the same damn things multiple times. One of our most successful webinars ever um, was just basically you never stop onboarding in business. You should always be onboarding, which includes implementation and onboarding for you listening. I know, right? Because if you're in that line of work, you always want to be releasing new features, new modules. They have to be adopted by the people, continuous there, right? So it is literally you want to be never not onboarding, um, complete onboarding, everything, implementation and onboarding. So it's interesting when you start to kind of get into the trenches of the mutual plans, getting them initially implemented and then kind of scaling. This just keeps going for most of you on this phone. Um, that's the approach of success we have repeatedly executed. Um, okay. Of course, duh. Um, we have a world-class product that helps our clients do this, obviously, and all the processes around it. But to do it really well, you definitely need an infrastructure. I think everybody understands that for, yeah, the processes, efficiencies, everything around that. And then making it feel bespoke for each client type, even though you're not spending the extra time, effort, or energy. And I know many of you, because you are in this space, you know that onboarding itself is becoming one of the biggest differentiators in many service line industries and in software. And so, because the clients are seeing failure left and right and the products aren't being used, so they're really challenging now. What is your onboarding process? How will I get our value? What we just talked about today is your blueprint for that, right? So here's something I offer up um, for anybody on the call today. Um, a lot of the times, obviously, we talk about this in broad scoping um, fashions, but many of you are thinking right now, well, how would I talk to my team about this? Because we might be having challenges or opportunities here, there. And this wasn't something we came up with. People actually organically from the webinars reached out and basically said, hey, do you mind talking with my team to just brainstorm around a lot of these areas to help create value? And I just have some of the areas there. And of course, to do this, I just simply ask this, that you and I, meaning whoever's submitting, we at least do a half hour, an hour call to understand your environment and everything. So I can better, understand like your company, your product, your services, whatever, just to wrap my head around this. And personally, I do a 1.5 hour session with you and your team to brainstorm. Of course, you as a leader probably have a couple of areas that you might want to focus on more than others. Clearly, I just put a for implementation and onboarding. This is just some of the areas I cover, but it's pretty intense. Meaning, we're really talking about your business, your product, your services, your customer types based on our worldly knowledge of all of our customers and everything. This is all free. It's obviously a good way for us to identify partnerships, but most of you are looking for ways to have conversations with your team to unpack maybe challenging conversations, areas of opportunity. You're growing fast and you got a small team doing a lot of stuff, or you're just not seeing the numbers you want on time to value or other things. So in this deck and in my follow-up email, that Calendly is just personally to me to schedule the initial session with just you to see if it makes sense to have a brainstorm session with your team and take the deliverables of that, and you do what you want. It's not like a contracting thing. Um, I offer that out, and we've helped a ton of organizations with that because the conversation is difficult. And also, there's a lot of concepts and ideas around that, which of course we have world-class experience in and around. So I offer that up to anybody on this call. And yeah, I look forward to if you take advantage of that. Look forward to sharing more resources and activities with you. So I appreciate it. As I said, on our website, proteus.co, tons of additional insights and hundreds of webinars and tools kind of based on many of the concepts. I will also, in our follow-up, include a couple of those and also the link, obviously, to a brainstorm session. So I appreciate it. Any other comments you might have, please throw that into the comments here today. I do read them all and I do answer them. So I appreciate that. And yeah, look forward to chatting with you guys at our next event. Thank you.